Well, thank you for having me. As you know, my name is Jennifer Rogers, and I have had the pleasure and honor of serving the citizens of our county as a common pleas judge for the past 10 years. Off the record, we were joking about how fast it goes. It is true. I am amazed at how fast the past 10 years have gone, but it's been a very meaningful decade in my life. Through those years, I've been able to learn a lot about our community, a lot about myself, a lot about those that have come before me, and most importantly, I've had the privilege of every day trying to do the right thing. During those 10 years, I have exclusively served in the family court. The family court also refers to all matters involving children and youth. And as recently as just this past September of 2020, I have taken on the responsibility of being the juvenile court judge. So delinquency cases are also in front of me at this time. In addition to one of the happy days every month, at least it is for me, Adoption Day, I have some very trying days emotionally as far as termination of parental rights cases, custody matters, custody trials, custody special relief petitions, contempt petitions, divorce matters. In all of those cases, I've been able to do my best to try to apply the facts of the law and to reach a just result. So I truly mean it when I use the word privilege, and over the past 10 years, I found a great sense of purpose in my work, and I hope to be afforded the opportunity to continue it.
In your role as a family court judge, you obviously deal a lot with children and youth, the agency.
Correct.
Were you surprised by some of the current news coming out of there about cases that were at least allegedly not followed up on, and the resignation of the head of the agency? And how do you think that may affect the children who come before your court?
I was painfully surprised. I hope that that demonstrates the fact that children and youth is a party that appears in front of the court, and the two are not intertwined. Children and youth is a party that appears before me on equal footing of a parent, if not more than one parent, and of course the child's well-being is of paramount concern. I was shocked. I was saddened. I was disappointed to an infinite degree. And I'm hoping that as we move forward in obtaining a new director for the agency, meaning the county, it's not a we, it's a they. I hope that the county, in selecting its new director, is cognizant of the need for a skilled, credentialed, highly experienced children and youth worker, so that we can move forward into the next chapter with a confidence that we're going to be able to learn and not repeat. There has been a provisional license granted to the agency most recently, and that of course is difficult, but it is a reality. How will it affect the children that appear in court? Well, as you most probably know, the cases that were the subject of the most recent development were cases that never made it to court. Those were cases that were never deemed to be cases. And so, therefore, those children were not able to be seen by the court. But I think being cognizant of what was not investigated enables us as a court to continue to do a thorough job in making sure that every possible question is asked and every investigation is undertaken to the point where we would have the ability to direct that it be undertaken.
Obviously, you and the 5 people running for retention today came into office during a period when, once again, there was a crisis, a scandal involving how children are handled in the courts. Can you talk a little bit about what changes have been made, since you're also in delinquency court, correct?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
So, how that has changed over the 10 years, and then maybe how the court, in a larger sense, has changed.
Certainly. As you said, 6 of us were fortunate enough to become judges 10 years ago. Some of those seats were the result of the tragedy that occurred at that time. And all of us, when we ran for this position, knew that we had a lot of proving to do. We knew we had a lot of public confidence to regain, and we knew we had a lot of changes to make. And I'm thankful to be able to state that we have obtained those things. In my interactions with members of the public, I leave with a feeling that public trust has been restored, at least with those that I've interacted with. I know that as a court we have been committed to making sure that the rights of not only juveniles, but every person that appears in front of us are indeed maintained and protected. But I can tell you that as a result of the bad thing that happened, and I use that term lightly, a good thing came out of it, and that is that there was the creation of the Joint Branch Commission. There was a level of scrutiny that was placed not only upon Lucerne County cases, but Commonwealth-wide cases. And so out of this terrible incident came something good, and that was an improved juvenile justice system within our Commonwealth, a level of attention and scrutiny to cases that perhaps were not, receiving them across the Commonwealth. And I can tell you that by all reports that I received from members of the Juvenile Court Judges Commission, the JCJC, Lucerne County is viewed as a leader now in making sure that those policies are indeed followed. Our Juvenile Probation Office is staffed with competent, qualified individuals, and we've had various juvenile court judges over the past 10 years. I'm the most recent. As I stated, I just assumed that role in September of 2020. During that tenure, there were various judges after the issue. Judge Gartley, Judge Barantoni, Judge Amesbury, and all of them served equally committed, and I think did a fine job of restoring the public's confidence in where we're going with our juvenile justice system. I just left juvenile court right before coming here. I just finished at 4:15 and came right over. So it's fresh in my mind. I can picture the face of the young man that appeared in front of me just half an hour ago.
Kind of just to stay on that topic, we've talked a lot about different diversionary programs, both in criminal courts and also in civil, with some of your colleagues who've been here already. Can you talk a little bit about how that works? I know you've only been there since September, but are there similar diversionary courts, not only in delinquency court, but are there any alternative programs, perhaps in custody or those kind of matters?
Yes.
You can talk to that.
Absolutely. I've been very thrilled to implement 2 diversionary courts in my tenure. The first was one that I myself created, which is a truancy court. It was modeled loosely after the Lackawanna County Truancy Court because they've had a great level of success. It's somewhat different, but it was launched 3 academic years ago in conjunction with a change in the public school code. And now what we're able to do is we're able to have what's called a student attendance improvement plan meeting at the school level to try and figure out what's not working and what is working with the child's school attendance. If that's not successful, then a referral is made to the magisterial district judge level. The magisterial district judges, many of them are having hearings within the actual schools so as to express the importance of school attendance. I'm coming to you, you don't need to come to me. That's been very effective. We've created, through a conjunction with Catholic Social Services, Lucerne County Children and Youth actually works with them in the implementation of a program known as PASS, standing for Parents and Student Success. They have dedicated truancy prevention workers that go out to the homes and try and implement a plan that can be created. If that does not work at the magisterial district judge level and the truancy is not abated, then the matter is referred to the Court of Common Pleas level. I'm happy to report the statistic is that over the past 3 years that this program has been in place, only 10% of the students move on to the step that we're trying to avoid, which is dependency, which is involvement with the Children and Youth Agency. And the state only has to have, in this instance the county, only has to have interaction with only 10% of those students. The remaining 90% truly, through the development of this plan, return to school. And so children are educated. The impetus for starting this program was that it was a cyclical process. Students would not attend, they would be referred to the magisterial district judge level, perhaps a family member, a parent in control would be fined. Fines would or would not be paid, but no one would be returning to school. The chairs remained empty. And so while perhaps a fine was paid, the goal of education was not being achieved. And I know the magisterial district judges felt frustrated in the fact that they weren't able to achieve a good result for these families and these children especially. And so that was one of the main reasons why Truancy Court was needed. So that's an example of a diversionary court that we've been able to develop within the dependency court system. Another recent example of a diversionary court is what the juvenile court's calling wellness court. It was initially the idea back when Judge Parentoni was the delinquency court judge, so I'm certainly not saying it was my idea. It was not my idea. It is modeled after a national model fashioned by the drug treatment courts. So it uses a drug court model, but it applies to juveniles because the term wellness court comprises both substance abuse issues and also mental health issues. The premise of wellness court is that there are certain juveniles that come into our system where it becomes readily apparent that the acts that they're committing are not due to criminogenic factors. They're due to struggles with substance abuse or mental health issues. And so therefore it's an effort to address the root cause of some of these bad choices. So the child, the juvenile, is surrounded by treatment providers. In some instances, it's both substance abuse and mental health treatment providers. In other instances, it may be one or the other. But the family's engaged, there's a peer educator that's involved, there's a mental health component, a drug and alcohol component through providers, and the juvenile is afforded the opportunity for a legal outcome known as a consent decree that expires upon 6 months of successful completion. And one of the terms of the consent decree is successful participation within wellness court. So it's relatively new. We've only really been implementing this program since last June because it took a lot to implement it, but everybody's been well trained, and so far we've seen a lot of good results.
Is it problematic that Lucerne County does not have a juvenile detention facility in the county?
It's problematic in the sense that the short answer is yes. Why? It's problematic in that our closest detention centers are in Bucks County and Northampton County. So therefore, if we have a juvenile locally that needs to be detained, we need to transport them there. And that's obviously a hardship, especially in the middle of the night. So ultimately, it's a hardship. And I know that there's some thought of potentially exploring the opportunity for maybe a regional facility when needed, because the bulk of juveniles do not need to be detained. Many of them closed, and with those closures came a lack of beds, which we're experiencing as well. So yes, it's difficult. Will we ever have one? That remains to be seen.
Is there any sort of effort to convince the county officials to do something about that?
There is a most recent need for beds that I think will be the impetus for further exploration based upon the needs that I've just expressed. I don't really see it Personally, being a county-only endeavor, I would think it would probably be more successful if it were a regional endeavor with sister counties.
We were talking to Judge Vogue. He said that the two new incoming judges will probably be joining you in family court.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the caseload at family court and how you see the responsibilities being divvied up next year?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that is the intention, that the two newly elected judges, will be family court judges. And that means that they will be responsible for custody matters, divorce matters, protection from abuse hearings, child support issues, custody trials. And then I'll be focusing my work on the juvenile court, both the dependency component and the delinquency component, in addition to the termination of parental rights matters that I spoke about and the adoptions. And then any miscellaneous matters would also fall upon me. I'll also be handling some ex parte PFA applications on a rotational basis, along with motions court with those other two new judges. The caseload is heavy. I did some research in preparation for today, and I can tell you that I have handled approximately 10,000 cases in my decade as a judge. That'll give you an idea of the caseload that's out there within this part of the law, and that encompasses everything that I've just spoken about. So the work is there. I'm certainly looking forward to being able to work with other judges in this area, and I'm sure we'll have a great sense of collegiality working together, whoever it may be.
With the Truancy Court, what kind of impacts and challenges have you seen as a result of the pandemic and the remote learning and now back in person? What are some of the challenges in the county?
Oh, the challenges were there. As we all know, there are 11 school districts within our county, and all of them do things somewhat differently. Every school district attempted during the pandemic, in my humble opinion, to do the best thing for the students. Some school districts, as you know, were all virtual. Some were a hybrid model. Some, as the pandemic progressed and things started to open up, would offer students an option. Others did not. They mandated a return to in-person learning. So the criteria for what constituted truancy was different in each school district. Some school districts required the student to log on in homeroom every day, and if you didn't, you were marked absent. Others permitted the students to turn in their work by 11:59 every evening, and as long as you got your work in before midnight, you were deemed present. So there were all different criteria that we had to juggle. I think one thing that the pandemic taught students, again, in my humble opinion, is how much they truly like being in school. This notion of virtual learning or cyber learning being, quote, easier, I think for the most part was debunked amongst many of our local students, and they found the challenge of virtual learning to be great. They didn't have the ability to, question a classmate or question a teacher. And we also can't lose sight of the fact that this caused a hardship upon families, as far as people having to stay home and not work because they needed to monitor their children's school attendance, students not having internet access, so therefore not being able to participate virtually. Since the pandemic has progressed, there have been, thankfully, a lot of community-based and governmentally based services that have been created to provide internet access to families that wouldn't have the means to afford it otherwise, which I'm very thankful to see. But those were all challenges, obviously. And the main challenge, of course, through the entire pandemic was making sure that children were educated. And thankfully, the bulk of the children within Truancy Court, yes, they were missing due to some of these internet issues or due to some of these issues with parents not being able to stay home and monitor the children's presence before the computer. But all in all, I saw a lot of school districts responding in positive and encouraging ways by having even home and school visitors pick up homework that they had done from their mailboxes and taking it back to school to make sure that they received credit. So there were challenges, but there were also a lot of great displays of teamwork between students, teachers, administration, and in the case where Truancy Court became necessary, the court.
Did you find that the Truancy Court became a little more lenient with regard to truancy during this cyber education period?
Your heart leans towards being lenient in those situations, but you had, at least I'm speaking for myself, I had to remind myself that, you know, you had to go to school. Just because there was a pandemic doesn't mean you don't have to go to school. And so the requirement of being present in front of your computer and learning remained that responsibility of the student. So while I was certainly understanding of some of the everyday hardships, such as not having internet access, it was my job then to think creatively and to talk about whether maybe the student could go down to the local library and use the Wi-Fi, or go to a neighbor's house or an aunt and uncle's house to use the Wi-Fi, so that they would miss out on their learning. So it led to a lot of creative thinking, but thankfully we were able to solve most of the problems that fell upon us.
And regarding the pandemic, did you implement any other changes, video conferencing, Zoom conferences?
Most definitely. Thankfully, I can say that the family court, not unlike any of the other courts, did not miss a beat. We were able to move right into, at first, telephonic hearings and then video hearings through the use of a conference line. I remember, what would it have been, the Monday after the world shut down, having my first telephone conference and having the stenographer on the line and having all parties on their respective telephone lines and conducting a hearing. And making sure everybody told me out loud when their right hand was raised so that they could receive the oath and moving into the hearing. And then through that, we were able to branch into video hearings, and we've utilized Microsoft Teams and Zoom to accomplish those, so that we didn't miss the cases that so urgently needed to be heard. And I'm also happy to say that didn't in any way take away from the adoption hearings. When we first started with COVID, it was March, we had 2 whole lists of adoptions that were scheduled for March and April. We didn't get to them, and that led to a lot of disappointed families and children. So in March, I believe we had 4 separate adoption days to make up for it all and caught up. And I had adoption hearings via Zoom, and tried to be creative again. I would ask, in the case of a young child, what their favorite character was, or cartoon character or something like that, and I had backgrounds behind me of all of those characters so that we could try and make it a memorable experience for them if they weren't going to be able to be in the courtroom and experience it in real time and in 3D.
Can you talk a little bit about how you're approaching the retention rates, which is obviously different than what you did 10 years ago?
Yeah, quite different. Quite different campaign all around. I think even for the current candidates, quite different in light of the pandemic. I'm not as active in public as I was, frankly, because I can't. I'm a sitting judge. I obviously have a judicial code of ethics to adhere to, and I must be understandably ever cognizant of where I am and what I do and who I associate with. And I'm able this year, because of the retention, to attend events that I would not have been able to attend in the past. I'm choosing those carefully, and shaking a few hands and reacquainting myself with those that I haven't been able to really interact with over the past 10 years. But as far as an open, active campaign, none of my colleagues were not doing that. We're running on our performance and the hopeful confidence that the public has in us, as displayed over the past 10 years.
Are you raising any money?
No. Any card that may be in circulation asking for a retention vote was paid for by each of the candidates. We're not raising money.
Anybody have any more?
Regarding some of these, changes spurred on by the pandemic, the video conferencing, do you see those changes as staying post-pandemic?
Some of them, I do. I think that the pandemic has taught us all so many things, and one of the things that it's taught me, and I know in conversation with many others, is taught us that what we said we could never do, we were very capable of doing. If you asked me a year ago, would you ever have a hearing via telephone, I would say, I don't think that would work out very well. But when you're forced to do it, you have to implement those things. And what I have seen, at least in the types of cases that I'm charged with hearing, is that I saw in many instances a higher participation level. So many of our children and families, specifically in this instance, parents, have transportation issues. And so in past hearings where everything was in person and somebody didn't have transportation to the courthouse, they didn't have a choice other than I cannot attend. Or their mass transportation wasn't running late and we were waiting at the courthouse for someone to make it after a mass transportation issue. Or someone did not have to take off of work. Someone could participate briefly from a break room and still maintain their employment. So all of those are examples of why in certain instances I am going to give families the opportunity to choose to participate virtually, either via video or via telephone, so as to ensure their participation. I would much prefer to have participation than non-participation. Another example of that is in the juvenile delinquency context. Every juvenile always will have the right, always has had and always will have the right to participation in person. But some juveniles, those that need to be placed, are placed in Western Pennsylvania. And the travel time from Western Pennsylvania to Eastern Pennsylvania, as we know, it starts at 4.5 hours and can amount to 6. It's okay to send 2 juvenile probation officers to pick up a juvenile and bring them back. That's their time. But most probably, it's a different set of juvenile probation officers traveling back. That's not the case. It's the same child coming and going. And that child misses programming, that child misses school, and that child's in a car for a long period of time. And if I can avoid that and give a juvenile the option to participate virtually, I do. And many of them take that opportunity and they seem to appreciate it. So that's something that I am going to maintain as well. That even is afforded to parents. An out-of-state parent, a parent that's at work and cannot get off of work but wants to participate. That option has worked very well and I intend on maintaining it.
Did you have questions?
You had questions, okay.
I think so.
All right.
Unless we missed something.
No. I'm just thankful that I was able to tell you some of the programs, and as far as the feel-good part of the job, I can tell you that I had the opportunity. It's not there anymore because of just space constraints, but I had the opportunity to develop the child's playroom for the kids waiting to come into hearings, and that worked out really well. I was able to implement a therapy dog program, which pre-COVID was wonderful. We're going to have to work it back in now that we're coming back to in-person. And another really positive, wonderful part of my job is that I was able to perform 82 weddings over the past 10 years. So that's a fun part of the job, a wonderful part of the job that I was able to enjoy as well. So, I hear a lot of difficult things. That my heart is heavy, and I have a good sense of purpose in this work, and I really hope to continue in it. But those are the things that balance things out, which really is a nice benefit.
Well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much.